Get the recording going. All right. So the key things for the second part of Module 3, the first part we were looking at more of those personalities, those structures, those approaches, and how your ego comes into play when creating strategies and tactics. For the next two chapters, this is what I would consider to be the filtering of the way your mind thinks, the way you work with others. How are you filtering information outward in terms of having those interpersonal connections and translating information, but how are you also filtering what's coming inward? So those feelings, those emotions, those when you're dealing with failure, how are you processing that, through your mind and body compared to just blurting something out that could be destructive for the team? And when it comes down to the quiz for this section, I'll be honest, and since you're on this call, you're going to get a good heads up. I'd say over half the quiz, maybe more, probably more. I mean, thinking about it, might be 9 out of your 14 points, maybe even 10, are coming straight from the first part of the module.
The only person in this conference.
So, whoops, did I lose you, Spence? I think I may have lost you. All right, so with that, the majority of the work from on the quiz, or the majority of the questions on the quiz, are from what you saw last week for part 1 of module 3. And this is, thinking more on how you're, just kind of processing information. All right. So the big theme, and this quote was right out of the book, but one of the big themes for this section really sticks with this quote. If we live in the past or fantasize about the future, we lose the present.
You are currently the only person in this conference.
In esports, it is tough to stay in the present because you're always thinking ahead, you're thinking behind. Where did you fail before? What do you need to do next? So with that, make sure that you are locked in. Make sure that you minimize distractions, and make sure that you focus on the present to be able to, get through competitions and put yourself in the best position. So with that, that's the condition of now. So when filtering some of that information coming in, when you're thinking about those past failures and what you want to do moving forward in the competition, slow it down and really process what you need to do in the moment. One big factor is when you think about distractions, it's actually proven that the quieter the environment, the more challenging it is to focus. So when you think about a competitive gaming environment, normally there's a lot of chaos happening. If you're sitting there in silence, playing the game, just tuned into the game, you think that might be good. But if the white noise around you isn't happening, it's proven that your mind can wander. You might go off track. You might start thinking about other things and lose the focus on the mission in play. So with that, whether it's background music or just having other things happening, whether, like I said, music or just conversations taking place, that stuff is good and does kind of help complement the path that you're going down, compared to silence that can be a very distracting barrier, we'll say. And like I said, you kind of get hung up in the past, focusing on where you succeeded, where you failed before, what you want to happen, really thinking about, distractions in terms of, hey, after we finish, what's next? Make sure you stay in the present, just so you don't dig yourself into a hole mentally in these competitions. So I talked about in the text, it talks about when you think about children can process information, it seems like, a lot quicker than adults can. So Kids know if they want to do something, they're going to work towards it and do it. If they want to build a sandcastle, they're going to build a sandcastle. If they want to build a fort, they're going to build a fort with the resources that they have. However, when we transition through adolescence into adulthood, we start hitting these different walls along the way. You're like, well, maybe I should do it differently. Maybe I should approach it this way. And you start to overthink what could be a pretty simplistic issue. That's just human nature. So when going through these competitions and even the work environment, yes, we talked about open-mindedness, how that can help you look at a situation from different angles. Open-mindedness is good, but when you are working towards a goal, you got to try to stay on track and have that inner drive that we do, or that we did as children. Kind of talk about that there as well. If you're not open-minded, if you have a singular focus, you're kind of blocking yourself off to education. You're creating your own bias. If you've done things a certain way, that's great. Let's build off that, but we got to have more than a solo route, just so we can maximize that potential to look at those other alternative pathways to overcome challenges when challenges appear. In this as well, in the past, we talked about gut feelings. Sometimes you just have that natural sense of this is what I have to do. Might not be a part of the plan. It might be intrinsically motivated. It might be, the observation of other things that are happening within the gaming environment. But having those intuitions and that gut feeling really play a role to the whole purpose of that strategy and drives you based on those past successes. So compared to assessing a situation fully, sometimes competitions are pretty quick pace. So for example, if you're competing in a 2K tournament in basketball or baseball or whatever, you can't really sit there and map out a strategy. Think about quickly think what you've done in the past and let that gut feeling, those intuitions lead the way. And with that, talk more about open-mindedness when it comes to schemes. The next part, whoops, I want to go back to the beginning. And then one big factor, and I'm sure you saw this on the quiz as well as some of the discussions, is the difference between hope and fear. So with fear, it's you might look at fear as a negative and you have a lot of concern. Like, how do you get past these certain barriers? Or, if I do this, should I do this? Is this going to get me to the outcome that I want? Fear can be a great driver and a great motivator and huge to really push you through your academics. The fear of failing, the fear of acceptance into groups, how do you overcome that? Having more of that optimistic twist with hope, especially in esport, can really help you rise and just go back to that intuition, and you're performing the action, you're contributing, you're taking the bull by the horns compared to waiting back and possibly missing out on an opportunity just by overthinking it. And going back to some of the tactics and strategies, it's good to have a good foundation. You don't want to have super complicated strategies in play. In some longer competitions, well thought strategies and tactics are good to implement as a team over time, but simplicity that will have less of a what's the right word? Just when you have a strategy that you can deliver quickly, then move on to the next, just helps with taking control of the pace of the game compared to holding back while the other competitors move ahead. Then from that external sensing comes more of that internal sensing and the dealing with emotions. When thinking about emotions in esports, but also in school, in life, in work, a lot of feelings can come into play and really force you to adapt or handle circumstances in different ways. So if you fail a test, are you going to lead into that next test with a sense of fear? Are you going to be angry due to a bad score you got and you're kind of holding this grudge going into round 2. Or based on how you handled that, it's like, wow, you have that frustration, and then let's start building on that. What could I do differently and have more of an optimistic outcome once you surround yourself, with more resources, time, whatever it is, to get past, the barrier that you may have had before. So a lot of emotions into esports, but also academics and life. You will, I think there's going to be a couple questions coming up in the quiz that focus on those. With those two, anger, hope, optimism, a lot of these feelings stem from childhood. So when you think about growing up, how did you control your emotions? How were your parents or guardians? How did they play a role in defusing the bomb or providing encouragement? One student in the course, may have even been you, but I was looking at the quizzes from chapter 2, and one of the students focused on how the support of their parents is a huge driver to succeed. So when you think about that kind of support, that was probably instilled in this individual since the very, very early stages of their learning in elementary school, and can be a huge motivator going forward. But also, coming from parents, if based on how you handled situations, possibly enabled to situations in the past, can lead to will lead to how you handle your feelings and emotions as a young adult, which kind of goes into this example. There are two types of people and how they handle their feelings: those that learned how to control them during childhood, but also those that might not have had that sense of control and could have had more outbursts, or maybe the support wasn't there for certain situations throughout life, which could cause a few communicative barriers and situations in the gaming and collegiate environment when working with others. So when it comes to managing these feelings, make sure that you take time to look in those. If you struggle on an assignment, if you struggle in one of the game, if you're coaching a basketball game and there's issue going on with the game plan, or a player isn't, adapting appropriately based on who they're matched up against, how are you processing? Are you going to let this build up? Are you going to communicate outward with them? Are you going to work with others to say, hey, what do we need to do to overcome this? Make sure that you don't, and I'm sure for you personally, Spence, as a coach, are more external compared to thinking everything process, compared to, holding everything in. But with that in coaching, make sure you have that same sort of mindset on how you process that information and how you go about those situations in academics and esport as well, just to make sure we're communicating in an appropriate way so nothing's hidden. Nothing too big is hidden within. Also, we talk about acceptance, and more specifically, conscious acceptance within this reading. So for conscious acceptance, this is when we're making a decision that will really help control an issue. Based on how our feelings are in play, sometimes we have to move forward, and we have to admit what we're looking at could be looked at in a different way. No, actually, I have a spelling mistake here. Should be quiet. But with this, many times in terms of handling these emotions and feelings, we have to put our ego in check. And then once you process it through that filter, your ego will adapt and understand how to go about situations in different ways moving forward. And that pairs with focusing more on the challenging side of things, the stages of grief. You have, and you're looking at the words right here and it's in the text, but the progression of failure, the progression of dealing with defeat. First off, you're in disbelief often, or you're frustrated. Then it kind of builds to, you start to overthink things. And what if I did this? What if I did this? And you're kind of hung up in this rut. And with that, that's a big area where people kind of fizzle off in terms of classes, in terms of competitions, in terms of sports. If you can't get over the hump, that's where the ultimate failure may happen, and the ultimate stage of grief where individuals just give up. So the core area to think about here, and once you're at that stage of depression, or before you even get to the stage of depression, hopefully, let's start reprocessing. What could I have done differently? What could I do next time? Thinking about the job search, I know many of your classmates might be seeking internships right now, or they might be looking for part-time jobs, might be looking for other ways to pay the bills. And with the shutdown happening again, or a level of a shutdown happening again, there's less jobs out there. So I've talked to multiple students over the past weeks who are really bridging that 3 to 4, and they're putting blame on themselves for not finding jobs, for not finding opportunities. So with that, if we get hung up in that 4, that's a scary area to live in. So let's look at the way that we have been applying, or what we've been looking for. Maybe let's use other paths. Let's look into other industries. Let's look into other ways to pay the bills compared to this very specific area you might have been focusing on. In terms of an internship, maybe part-time jobs could suffice. So whether it's a job search, eSport, academics, let's try to jump to this stage 5 as early as possible before we go down a dangerous rabbit hole that might be, or likely will be, very challenging to get out of. And I already talked about barriers, but you'll run into those when channeling, or when dealing and handling emotions and conflicts. And when it comes to this, I already said it before, but let's own those feelings. Let's look inside to figure out what we could have done differently and adapt, compared to hanging up in the past. Also, with these, the way we handle these emotions guaranteed are going to have a direct impact on our teammates, but we have to remember our teammates are going to be handling barriers as well. They're going to have their own issues to get through. So one of the things you're going to do in SMT 240, if you take that class in the spring, you will have individual assignments, but you're also going to have a group assignment working with others. In academics, the professional world, as well as eSport, got to know how to work with others. And part of that is understanding how to deal with others' approach, but also their feelings, their emotions. So they could be dealing with other life issues beyond the class. How are you going to help them get through that? How are you going to build that camaraderie? How are you going to be an aid while you also have to accomplish your own tasks in hand? So that's something that we will dig into a little deeper in 240 in the event and facility management class, but something you really want to think about throughout the rest of this course. And depending on what your sociological concept is for your individual project, how does filtering those feelings and working with others come into play in some of the situations that you're looking at? Then, final slide, when it does come to processing those emotions as a team, as individuals, we gotta do it together. So let's look at what do we need to do without pointing blame, without mentally breaking down a teammate that may be going through something beyond the game. Make sure that we, as you know, as a coach, Spence, encourage them, provide constructive solutions. Don't get hung up on the negative. Yes, it's good to address the failures, but let's take that and talk about how we overcome those moving forward to keep the vibes high. And finally, when it comes to those issues, yes, I already said we gotta process our own feelings as an individual, but also don't let everything boil up inside. So as a team member, make sure that you are communicating, that you are there as a pillar, that you are there to help your fellow team members, just so deconstruction isn't happening in the minds of your teammates. And with that, We, really covered just how to process, how to evaluate the different feelings, both on the outside, how you're going to communicate outward, how you're going to process on the inside to make sure that you don't take down others with you in times of challenge and stress, but also utilize those teammates as resources, just to make sure everyone's benefiting from the dialogue, the interpersonal communication, and is no one's in a rut at the end of the day. So